In 2024, a former FBI agent named Frank Figliuzzi wrote a book. He worked in a department most Americans have never even heard of. This department focused on one specific type of crime. Crimes committed by people whose profession makes them the perfect killers. I'm talking about truck drivers. Right now in the US, there are 3.5 million truck drivers. Every day, they travel thousands of miles. They carry food, clothing, fuel. Without them, the economy would collapse in 3 days. But among those 3.5 million, there are some who carry more than cargo. They carry death. In 2004, the FBI created a special unit. It's called the Highway Serial Killings Initiative. Why? Because they did the math. Since the 1980s, on American highways, 850 women have been murdered. 850. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is official FBI statistics, confirmed by DNA evidence, recovered bodies, and closed cases. And here's the worst part. 200 of those murders are still unsolved, and there are 450 suspects, drivers who are still behind the wheel today. They're still driving the same roads. Do you know why truck drivers are the perfect killers? Because they're not tied to any one place. A serial killer who lives in a city leaves traces where he lives. He can be tracked by neighborhood, by time, by geography. A truck driver picks up a victim in one state, rapes and kills her in another, dumps the body in a third. Police in different states don't talk to each other fast enough. Years pass before anyone connects the dots and realizes this is the same person. The victims? Mostly prostitutes, runaway girls, homeless women, the ones no one misses right away. And even if someone does miss them, finding the killer is almost impossible. Frank Figliuzzi said one thing that sent chills down my spine. They don't just kill. They've turned their trucks into mobile torture chambers. Let me tell you about one of them. Robert Ben Rhodes, nickname the Truck Stop Killer. In 1990, he was arrested. By then, he'd been hunting women for 15 years. Only 4 murders were officially proven, but investigators are sure the real number is closer to 50. He had his own method. He'd pick up a girl on the highway, offer her a ride. The cab was warm, cozy, music playing, she'd relax. A few miles later, she'd realize the door was locked, and there was no way out. Rhodes had turned his truck into a torture chamber. He hung his victims from fishhooks, alive, and tortured them for hours. One of them was a 14-year-old girl named Regina Walters. She'd run away from home to meet a boy. Rhodes picked her up on the highway. He kept her in his truck for weeks. He called her father, introduced himself, and said, calmly, "I've made some changes. I cut her hair." Regina's father went insane with grief, but there was nothing he could do. His daughter was in the hands of a man who traveled across the entire country. There was no way to find her. Rhodes was caught by accident. Years later, a survivor identified him. But how many Rhodes are still on the road today? The FBI keeps a database. Right now, there are 450 names in it. Drivers whose DNA matches samples from crime scenes. Drivers seen near murdered women. Drivers who've never spent a day in prison because there isn't enough evidence. They're driving every day, past your house, past schools, past gas stations where you stop for coffee. You'll never know what's inside that cab. Here's another case. Harry Artman, a truck driver from Florida. He was only arrested in 2022. 16 years earlier, he'd killed 24-year-old Daisy Shack. Then he confessed to 11 more murders. When they caught him, he was 64 years old. He'd spent his whole life hauling freight and killing women, and no one could stop him because he was always moving. Understand this. When a serial killer lives in a city, sooner or later, he gets caught because police see a pattern. Same neighborhood, same victim type, same time of night. When a serial killer is a truck driver, there is no pattern. Today he's in California. Tomorrow, Texas. Next week, Florida. Bodies are scattered across the country, and no one connects them because there are thousands of miles between each crime. The FBI believes that over the last 40 years, truck drivers have killed more people than many famous serial killers you've seen in movies. You just don't know their names. Because their victims are the ones no one looks for. I want you to remember one number, 850. This isn't just a statistic. It's 850 women who got into a truck because they were cold, because they needed to get to another city, because they trusted a man behind the wheel. They didn't know about the hooks. They didn't know the door was locked. They didn't know the driver had done this dozens of times before. Frank Figliuzzi, the FBI agent I mentioned earlier, said something in an interview. These people hate society. They choose this job to isolate themselves, but when they realize they can kill and get away with it, their inner evil breaks loose, and stopping them is almost impossible. Right now, in the U.S., there are 3.5 million truck drivers. Among them, 450 suspects in unsolved murders. 450 people whose names are in an FBI database. 450 people who still get on the highway every single day. And every day, they watch the roadside, looking, waiting. And if you find yourself standing on a highway with your thumb out, if you ever think a truck is just a truck and the driver is just a tired man trying to help, remember the number 850. Remember the hooks. Remember that some trucks carry more than cargo. They carry secrets that will never be solved. Safe travels. There are roads you drive to get from point A to point B. And then there are roads people drive to die. Interstate 45 in Texas connects Houston to the Gulf of Mexico. 80 miles of asphalt that locals simply call the road to the beach. Thousands of cars pass here every day. Families with kids, teenagers heading out for the weekend, truckers hauling freight to the port. None of them know they're driving down one of the most terrifying places in America. From 1971 to 2006, on this 80-mile stretch, more than 30 bodies were found. 30 young women, teenage girls, sometimes just children. They were found in roadside ditches, on abandoned oil fields, in reservoirs, in fields that locals would later call the killing fields. But the scariest part isn't how many there were. The scariest part is that it wasn't just one killer. Police believe that at least 5 different serial killers were operating in this same area. 5 different men who chose the same road. At the same time, for 35 years, I'm going to tell you about some of them. Not because it's pleasant to hear, but because these girls deserve to have their names remembered. August 1971. 2 14-year-old friends, Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw, drove to the beach in Galveston. A normal summer day. Sun, water, music. They never came back. 6 months later, 2 boys found a human skull in Clear Lake, 15 kilometers from League City. Floating in the water were the remains of both girls, tied at the hands and feet, shot in the back of the head. Same month, 1971, 15-year-olds Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson. They were last seen getting into a white van at an ice cream shop. The driver probably smiled and said, "Need a ride, girls?" They were found in Texas City, stripped below the waist, bound. November 1971. 12-year-old Allison Craven disappeared right from her apartment near the I-45 highway. For months later, her body was found in a field 20 kilometers from home, dismembered, buried in 2 different locations. 1973. 16-year-old Kimberly Pitchford finished her driver's ed class. She was supposed to call her parents. She didn't. Found in a thicket near Angleton, strangled. 1974. 14-year-old Georgia Gear and 12-year-old Brooks Bracewell went to the neighborhood store for chips and soda. Vanished. Police decided they'd just run away from home. Didn't even look for them. Their remains were found 7 years later, in a drainage culvert under the road. 1977. 12-year-old Suzanne Bowers left her grandmother's house to walk home. A 3-minute walk. She wanted to grab her swimsuit and go to the beach. Her remains were found 2 years later, with a gunshot wound to the skull. 1983. 23-year-old Heidi Fye was hitchhiking to Houston to meet her boyfriend. Vanished. 6 months later, the Fye family dog brought her skull to the house. 1984. 16-year and Laura Miller asked her mom to drop her off at a payphone near a gas station. She needed to call her boyfriend. She was supposed to walk back. She never did. Her body was found 2 years later, in the same vacant lot as Heidi Fye. 1986. 13-year-old Crystal Jean Baker left her grandmother's house to use a payphone. Found a few hours later under a bridge in a neighboring county. Beaten, raped, strangled. Do you know who her great-great-granddaughter was? Norma Jean Baker, the woman the whole world knows as Marilyn Monroe. For years, police couldn't connect these deaths into a single picture. Girls disappeared from different towns. In different years, their bodies were found in different places. Police departments from different counties didn't talk to each other. Parents were told, she probably ran away from home. Don't worry, she'll come back. They never came back. It wasn't until the mid-'80s, when several bodies were found in the same vacant lot in League City, that the FBI finally got involved. And then they understood the scale. 15 years earlier, in 1971, bodies had already been found on this same highway. No one had thought to connect them, because there were multiple killers. They worked the same road like a shift crew on a death assembly line. Do you know what the scariest part about the killing fields is? Not the number of victims, not the cruelty of the killers, not that so many are still missing. The scariest part is how easily it happened. Girls would leave the house for 5 minutes, walk to the store for chips, get in a car with someone they knew, hitch a ride, because in the 70s that was normal, and they vanished. Texas police are still investigating. Dozens of cold cases, tons of evidence that sat in archives for decades. DNA tests being done now, half a century later. They caught a few of the killers. One was sentenced to death in 2021. Another died in prison, never confessing to everything. But most are still free, or dead, taking with them the secret of what happened on that road. I want you to remember these names. Rhonda Johnson, 14 years old. Sharon Shaw, 14 years old. Debbie Ackerman, 15 years old. Maria Johnson, 15 years old. Allison Craven, 12 years old. Kimberly Pitchford, 16 years old. Georgia Gear, 14 years old. Brooks Bracewell, 12 years old. Suzanne Bowers, 12 years old. Heidi Fye, 23 years old. Laura Miller, 16 years old. Crystal Jean Baker, 13 years old. This isn't just a list. These are girls who left their homes and never came back. There are more, many more. 30 bodies were found. How many missing persons are still listed in the archives? How many are still lying in the fields along I-45, waiting to be found? Interstate 45 is still running. Thousands of cars every day. Families driving to the beach. Truckers hauling freight. Teenagers hitchhiking because in 2025 it still seems safe. No one knows how many more bodies are lying in the fields along that road. No one knows how many killers are still behind the wheel. But one thing is certain. The killing fields aren't closed. They're just waiting for new victims. Pause. If you ever drive on I-45 through Texas, don't stop at deserted gas stations. Don't get in cars with strangers. Don't send your kids to the store alone. Not even during the day. Not even for 5 minutes. Not even if it feels safe. Because that road remembers. It remembers every single one of them. And it never lets go. Have you ever wondered how far a person will go to save their family? Not in a movie, not in a book, but in real life, when it's 20 below outside, there's no one around for miles, and the gas ran out 2 days ago. In November 2011, a family of 4 left Las Vegas heading for a small town in Utah, a regular trip, a regular family, a regular decision by a father to cut through the mountains and save a couple of hours. They had no idea those couple of hours would stretch into 11 days, and that the ending of this story would make even people who don't believe in miracles cry. James and Kristen were husband and wife, parents of 2 children. In November 2011, they were driving home after a family funeral. Tired, drained, they wanted one thing: to get to their own bed as quickly as possible. The GPS showed 2 routes: the main highway, 5 hours, and a shortcut through the Marcagunt Mountain range, 3.5. James looked at his exhausted wife, at the kids fussing in the back seat, and made a decision. Let's go through the mountains. We'll save time. He didn't know that road was closed for the winter. that the warning signs had been torn down by wind months ago, that in 2 hours, their car would be stuck in snow with no way out. An hour later, they entered a zone with zero cell service. 2 hours later, the wheels spun uselessly in deep snow. James tried to get out, but the car just dug itself deeper into the white mess. "Dad, are we there soon?" the youngest asked. "Soon, son, very soon." It was a lie, the most terrible lie of his life, because ahead of them were 11 days of hell. When you're stranded in the mountains in winter, you have a few hours to make a choice, a few hours before night falls. And night in the Utah mountains means 20 below. James understood. If they stayed in the car, they'd freeze when the gas ran out. If they walked, they'd die from exhaustion. He chose a third option. Every day, he went out looking for help. He left his wife and children in the car with what little food remained and one instruction: "Don't go anywhere. I'll come back." He left in the morning. He returned at night. Sometimes he returned. One day, he fell through the ice into a freezing river up to his waist. He kept going, in wet clothes, at 15 below. He couldn't allow himself to die. The children ate snow instead of water. Kristen divided the last crackers so everyone got some. They burned tires to stay warm. They stripped the upholstery from the seats and burned it. They pulled up the floor mats and burned them. The car was slowly disappearing, turning into the heat that kept them alive. And James kept walking, again and again. 8 miles one way, 8 miles back, up to his waist in snow, without food, without hope. On the 8th day, he found a hunting cabin, empty, locked, but on the porch sat gas canisters for a generator. James took the gas, started walking back. He sat in a snowdrift and watched the sky darken. His strength was gone. His legs wouldn't obey. His thoughts were jumbled. "I'm not coming back," he thought. "They'll die there alone." And at that moment, he heard a sound. It was a snowmobile. 2 hunters were riding by and spotted a figure sitting in the snow in the distance. "You okay?" they shouted. James lifted his head, tried to say something, and passed out. The hunters got him to the nearest town, called for rescuers. James woke up in the hospital hours later, and the first thing he did was grab a nurse's arm. "My family, they're out there, in the mountains, 8 days without food, please." Rescuers flew out in a helicopter. They found the car. Inside, Kristen and 2 children, alive, freezing, but alive. 11 days, 8 miles from civilization, temperatures down to 20 below. They survived. You'd think, happy ending. Family saved. Father is a hero. Everyone goes home. But there's one detail in this story, one small detail that turns it from touching into something else entirely. James died 3 years later. Not from frostbite, not from injuries, from cancer. When doctors examined him after the rescue, they found strange changes in his body. No one paid attention. They blamed it on stress, on hypothermia, on exhaustion. But 3 years later, cancer devoured him in 6 months. Before he died, James called his wife and said, "I regret nothing, not a single day, not a single step through that snow. I would walk those 8 miles 1,000 more times for you." Kristen held his hand as he left. And a month after the funeral, she found an old notebook in his backpack. There were scribbles in pencil. James had written them during those 11 days, sitting in the car while the children slept. One entry tore her heart out. "If they don't find me, let them at least find this note. I love them. I've always loved them. I walked 8 miles today and thought, what if there's nothing at the end? What if I die here in this snow and they die there in the car? But I kept walking, because if there's even one chance in 1,000, I have to take it. I promised them I'd come back. I have no right to break that promise." Kristen didn't cry when she read it. She just sat there, staring at the wall. Then she stood up, walked to the window, and said out loud, "You came back. You always came back." You know what the scariest part of this story is? Not how they survived, not how he died from cancer. The scariest part is that there are thousands of stories like this. Every year, people disappear in America's mountains, deserts, and forests. They search for weeks, they rarely find them. Even more rarely do they find them alive. The James family is an exception. They survived because one man refused to give up, because he walked 8 miles through waist-deep snow when he had no strength left, because he promised to come back. But how many never returned? How many fathers, mothers, children are still lying in those snowdrifts, and no one will ever know their names? James is buried in a small cemetery in Utah. On his grave it says, "He came to save, and he saved." Kristen goes there every November. She sits on a bench and talks to him. You know, she says, "I still wake up at night and hear that sound. The sound of the snowmobile. You said it was a miracle, but I think it was you. You wouldn't let us die. You wouldn't let yourself die until you finished what you started." Last year, James's oldest son joined a search and rescue team. He says he wants to help those who get lost in the mountains. When asked why, he answers, "Because my father wouldn't have made it home if someone hadn't helped him back then. Now it's my turn to help." You know what sound James heard that evening, sitting in a snowdrift, ready to die? Not a snowmobile, not the hunters' voices. First, he heard crying, children crying. His own children, 8 miles away, still in that car. He told the doctors later, "I heard them so clearly, like they were standing right next to me. I realized, if I close my eyes now, they'll die there alone. So I got up." He got up, and he walked. And 5 minutes later, he saw the headlights of a snowmobile. Doctors say it was a hallucination, exhaustion, cold, oxygen deprivation. The brain creates what isn't there. Kristen says otherwise. He heard us. We were 8 miles away. We were sleeping. We couldn't have been crying. But he heard us. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe love is a sound too, just not everyone knows how to listen. James heard, and that's why he came back.